I know that many students struggle with the poetry clusters in English literature, and some poems they find more challenging than others. My students often say that the Prelude by William Wordsworth, the extract from the Prelude, puts them off because it's not divided into stanzas, and it just seems like a lot to read. It fits on an A4 page, but yes, it's not divided into stanzas, and it was published just after Wordsworth died in 1850, so that's quite a long time ago. Um, I think this is just a story. And so I like to talk about it. I like to kind of try and make it seem a bit simpler. Um, so let's see what you think. First of all, Wordsworth's probably our best known romantic poet. He lived in the Lake District. When I talk to students about this poem, if they have never been to the Lake District, we look at a picture, we see the mountains and the lakes and what it's like, especially where I live in Essex, it's like the opposite. And it's helpful to know that Wordsworth was very interested in nature and in his relationship with nature, and romantic poets often addressed human emotion and those sorts of ideas. Um, Wordsworth was very prolific. This is my collected poems. There are well over 1,000 pages in this book. I haven't read it all. I had to read a lot during my degree, but not all of Wordsworth. And The Prelude is a very long autobiographical poem. It's more than 100 pages, I think about 120 pages in this book. So what we have here is a little story taken from The Prelude, and it's about little Wordsworth. I like to imagine him being about 11, something like that. And he was wandering about by himself one summer evening when he saw a boat on a lake, Lake District, that belonged to a shepherd, and he took it. And he knew he shouldn't have done. And he rowed, and obviously if we row, we row backwards, and he knew that if he wanted to go in a straight line, he should fix his view on a particular point. So he found the top of a ridge, which was for him at that point the horizon. Again, very different from where I live in Essex. On a clear day, the horizon might be 10 miles away, but if you're in a very hilly place, the horizon can be just there. So as he moved backwards in his boat, and it was all fantastic, and the moonlight and everything was just so exciting, even though he felt a bit bad, he kept his view, his sight on this ridge. And he moved further and further backward. We know that when we move, our perspective changes, and we might see things that we didn't see before. So as he moves, another ridge seems to come up, or a mountain seems to come up from behind the one he was looking at. And the more he moves, the bigger it seems to get. And he is terrified because he thinks this is some kind of mountain come to life, and that it's chasing him. So he turns around quickly, rows home, trying to be slightly responsible, ties his boat up again, and runs home. And these ideas about monsters, visions, things like that stay in his head for quite a few days, and he's quite depressed and scared. So I'm going to read it. I'm not going to go through it in detail. If anybody wants me to do that, to go through this poem line by line, then I'm more than happy to do so. Let me know. Because some of the sentences are multi-clause and quite complex, and that can put people off as well. If you feel you like to know absolutely everything that's in this poem and what everything means, let me know, we can do that. So here we go. And in the beginning, on the first line, it says led by her. He means led by nature. He's been talking about nature just before this extract. And so when he says led by her, he means he feels he was inspired by nature to go to this place. So one summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cave, its usual home. Straight I unloosed her chain and, stepping in, pushed from the shore. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still on either side small circles glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. But now, like one who rows proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line, I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge, the horizon's utmost boundary. Far above was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. When, from behind that craggy steep, till then the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars. And still, for so it seemed, with purpose of its own, and measured motion like a living thing, strode after me. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the covert of the willow tree. There in her mooring place I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went, in grave and serious mood. But after I had seen that spectacle, for many days, my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. O'er my thoughts there hung a darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. No familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men, moved slowly through the mind by day and were a trouble to my dreams. That's it. So there's fear, there's our relationship with nature, not always the happiest one. Imagination. What's happened is he's seen something, he's only little, he's misunderstood it, and he's created something to frighten himself. He's frightened himself with his own imagination. And the memory of what happened has stayed with him and continued to frighten him afterwards. It's written in iambic pentameter. Anybody wants to know about that? Let me know. We can have a whole video on iambic pentameter. I love talking about that, which is obviously the verse that Shakespeare wrote most of his plays in. There are nice examples of some figurative techniques. Troubled pleasure is a nice oxymoron. Elfin, like an elf, small, delicate pinnace, not sure how you pronounce it, little boat. Bark, again, is a word for boat. Think of embark or disembark, means to get on a boat or to get off a boat. There's quite a lot of enjambment and caesura in this poem. So although we generally have the iambic pentameter form, there is some flexibility within that where the lines run on in enjambment and there are stops with caesura in the middle of the lines. And most of it is the story of what happened that evening. However, when you get to that after I had seen that spectacle for many days, this is what stays with Wordsworth afterwards. I like to get students to read the Daffodils poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, as well as this one. It says the same sort of thing, but in reverse. Same thing was happening, and this really was true. because Dorothy Wordsworth wrote about it. Wordsworth was um, walking around in the Lake District and came across an enormous amount of daffodils, thought it was amazing, and most people tend to think that that's what the poem is about. The final stanza of that poem, however, says he never realized what wealth that experience had brought to him, because forever afterwards, whenever he was bored or lonely or not thinking about anything, he could remember the daffodils and his heart would dance with them. So it's a bit like this in reverse. It's an experience. So that poem is an experience which he then used to make himself feel happy afterwards. This poem is an experience which stayed with him afterwards and made him feel unhappy and scared. Um, so I think it's quite fun. I think we can imagine this little boy doing something he shouldn't have done and not understanding perspective, and being really scared for no reason at all. This is the kind of thing that we might now call monsters, unknown modes of being. And the poem then continues and talks about other things in his memory. How real this was or not, nobody knows. Unlike the daffodils incident, which Dorothy Wordsworth has corroborated, um, the um, the prelude is supposed to be autobiographical, but he was a poet. We don't know how much of it was or wasn't. There are some quite nice lines. So he talks about the moonlight on the water. Nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still on either side small circles glittering idly in the moon. It's pretty. You can imagine the oars, the water falling from the oars, and as it falls and the drops fall into the lake, the little circles light up in the moonlight until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. So he was really enjoying this. So we can see from this that Wordsworth loved nature even when he was little. So hopefully people might find that interesting. I would be delighted if somebody goes and reads I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, if you haven't read it before, and please let me know what you think.